Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Good Governance Academy webinar. Really looking forward to today's discussion. I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little later. Let's wait for everybody to come online. And while we do that, just to let you know that the reactions are open. So if you like what is being said, if it resonates with you, if you would like to hear more, thumbs up, clap, heart, show your emojis. That would be lovely. Thank you very much. It gives us some feedback. Today, we're also going to try something a little new. I know I've done it in the past, but let's just try. If you want to, we're going to see what questions and answers come through. And we might just ask you if you would like to answer ask the question live. If you'd like to come and join us in the panel. On the stage, so to speak, and ask your questions live. So we'd love to do that today. I know we're going to have perhaps a little smaller audience today, although the GGA events tend to be quite big. But I'd also, if you've got yes, please let us know where you're from. Thanks for the reactions. Let us know where you're from in the chat function. Please interact on the chat function, put your LinkedIn profile, share your information. Let's create the community that we're trying to be around good governance. And cold, Gary, yes, it's cold in Cape Town. Excuse me, all dressed up here. You could see Louise is not in Cape Town. We'll get to that because Louise is a little warmer. But thanks, everyone. Your questions, please put them in the Q&A function so that we can distinguish them from the chat. But welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. I have been so excited and I've been so looking forward to this event. The reason why is because I found Louise on LinkedIn and I started asking her about, because I saw she was purpose-driven and purpose-led, and we were looking for a panel, and I really like to bring in new speakers. I was looking for new speakers for a panel on purpose-driven organizations, which was our theme before now in June and beginning of July. Now we're moving into AI and technology as our theme for the next couple of months. But came across Louise and I just started a discussion with her. We set up a meeting and then I just stopped and I said, no, Louise, I can't be the only person that hears this. We must have a fireside chat. I would love for the GGA, the Good Governance community, to hear what you're talking about because it really resonates. And for me, the big difference was we've been working on purpose-led organizations, purpose-driven organizations, but we had never spoken about the people that, practice what you preach, the people behind it that are doing the purpose-led organizations, that actually they need to be purpose-driven as well. So there was a little bit of for me, it was actually, we need to think about the person behind the activity as well. So Louise, it's really great having you be able to share that with the broader community, and welcome to the Good Governance Academy.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today and excited to share about that piece. So
good. We can all see your LinkedIn profile, so we know what it is that you do, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit about who you are.
So I'll just first say I'm half British, half French, and I'm sitting in the Swiss mountains right now. And normally I would have kind of my jumpers on, but we're having a bit of a heat wave. So it's a bit of a change for us. And in terms of, I will share a little bit about my background because maybe it will help place me. My first career was as a lawyer and a mediator in the City of London. And as a result of a major illness, I made myself a promise, which was that I would live with no regrets and that I would deliver on my purpose on this planet, whatever that might be. And that was 25 years ago. And so I'm not a perfect person at all, but I have kept that promise. And it has taken me on a very interesting adventure. I've now got 25 years of working in career and leadership development. But specifically with change makers and visionaries and innovators, and supporting leaders at what I call pivotal moments. So those profound moments where you have to really have a thought about, what am I actually doing on this planet, and how am I supporting what is happening on this planet? And so, yeah, the piece here is that all of this has been coming together in terms of the conversation that you were talking about around how do we need to evolve ourselves as leaders for these times, specifically in purpose-driven organizations, to be able to impact at a different level.
So what is the change that we need? So we've heard about the change, in ourselves and understanding where our purpose is, but what is the fundamental shift that you are seeing that leaders need in today's world?
So one of the pieces that I've been really specifically looking at is that what we're actually doing at the moment, whether we're doing it consciously or not, is we are at the doorway for a shift in system, a shift in fundamental paradigm. So a part of my experience was working very much in the sustainability field. And what I found is when I first started, I think it was about 2008, 2009, we thought that we would just stick solar panels on the roof and everything was going to be fine, basically. And then we realized, oh, it's not going to be that simple. And so then you move on to things like circular economy. Okay, we've got to actually start looking at a deeper level as to how we're operating in terms of our businesses. And then you're realizing, okay, that's still not going to cut it. And so that's when I started looking at also that purpose-driven organizations, but also that whole concept of the well-being economy in terms of, well, what if we're being called to a deeper shift and a shift which is having us rejig our foundations so that we're actually creating a flourishing on the planet for ourselves, each other, and for the planet itself. So what I've been looking at in this context is how leadership actually needs to evolve if we're looking at a paradigm shift, as opposed to still maintaining what we have with a bit of incremental change.
So as a stalwart corporate leader, and this is my first foray into, in the last 5 years into nonprofit, my role has been Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Executive Officer. It sounds a bit like the fairy in the sky stuff, this world changing and well-being and global well-being. I could see how it's important, but I'm still, in the budget for next year, we're still putting, solar panels on the roof and water tanks down. And what is that shift? And what is driving that shift from that, more corporate mind into something that is what you're talking about?
So I think up until quite recently, it was still kind of a maybe nice to have, as I'd said, maybe in that kind of visionary dreamlike place. But the reality of now is that we're actually experiencing a lot of the breakdown of the existing system. It's like external forces are actually impacting how our system has been set up. And I call that like a perfect storm of whether it's the sustainability crisis, whether it's the AI disruption, or the upheaval of the world order. So before, I think, as you said, it was like, hey, I could go and talk about that. And there would be some people who would say, yes, definitely want to do that. And others will be like, well, one day, thank you very much. It's a nice thing to do. That what's actually happening right now is that we are at a pivotal time because the world as we know it is actually breaking down and getting fundamentally disrupted. And so it becomes that it's not just a nice to have anymore. It's thinking, well, if my existing paradigm and my existing maps are getting disrupted and don't work anymore, then how am I going to navigate in this time? Because what we're actually going into is a time of what I call that is uncharted. And what I mean by that, and so what I'm seeing a lot actually happening in organizations, is that we're actually already in the middle of the ocean in a perfect storm. With 100-meter waves. But most people are still operating as if we're nicely tied up in port, in safe port, actually
the annual
focusing.
budget.
Exactly. On my annual budget. And I'm not saying, it's not like it's an either or, it's two paradoxes that we're going to have to hold together and navigate. And so I'm seeing, for example, a lot of doubling down on operational excellence in terms of efficiency. We're going to cut headcounts. And, I, of course, having been in a corporate paradigm for 25 years, I get it. The thing that's interesting is, for example, one of the things I'm seeing is in those cuts, a lot of innovators, visionaries, the ones who think differently are getting cut. Now, if you understand that actually we're now much more in a time where we can't just rely on how we've always done things, then you actually need those people because they're the ones who are going to be able to work out what the new maps need to look like. So the piece here now is it's actually a question of being able to navigate our times, understanding that we are in different times, as opposed to, I say, before where it was like, oh, okay, maybe one day we need to think differently. And the whole well-being thing, as once on a panel, and I just always remember it was somebody, a leader in the United Nations, and he just looked at the audience. He says, "Let's be very clear. Well-being, we're not talking about spas." And
Yes.
and a big part of it is to remind ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? Because if we're not serving survival and flourishing, then we're actually serving destruction. And so there's a piece there, which is that often we've been in systems that we've just maintained and sustained, and that's been fine. But with the disruption we're experiencing, we get to have a choice point, which is to ask ourselves, what are the systems that we've created and what are they in service to? And ultimately, if there's disruption, that means that there's going to need to be also shape-shifting, evolution. And so it's like, I'm not quite sure if we can keep just going back to what we've always done because things aren't stable. And so based on that, we are going to be creating something. And the real question is, what are we going to actually be creating? So then it becomes part of the questions of this moment as opposed to the dreams of the future, basically.
Just picking up on what you're saying, it's so true, is that innovators have never been able to thrive, flourish in corporates. I haven't seen it. Innovators are the first ones to be cut, strategy officers, because what value are you adding to the organization? And so innovation tends to happen when you almost have a company that's focusing on innovation, and then that company gets purchased by a company that's battling to innovate. And that's the way they innovate, is because the big company buys the little company. And then we have all of the issues when you've got mergers and acquisitions, where it assumes this company, the innovators get frustrated, and the innovators leave. How do leaders go about balancing, if you've got a team and you want to innovate, so you've got these innovative thinkers, and we think about, the innovation spaces, and then we've got the people who are actually doing in the engine room and making it work. How do you balance this new world like that?
So I'll actually backtrack first, because a big part of my career, maybe at least 12 years or more, has been working with corporate change makers, and also what we call intrapreneurs. And
sorry, different from...
Yeah, intrapreneurs. So it's people inside organizations who are ultimately trying to bring this new kind of value. And usually it is because they are much more purpose-led. And a lot of it is done off their own backs in a way, because they want to have a positive impact. And so they are trying to find ways of doing that. And
within the corporate
organizations. I think one of the things that's been interesting around the whole purpose movement is how since, I don't know, maybe about 2010, how that whole movement, and it has expanded in terms of the landscape of all the different ways that you can have an impact actually have expanded. So whether it's being a corporate change maker, or an intrapreneur, or a social entrepreneur, because before you would just go into a humanitarian organization and that was it. So
that was an NGO meant.
Exactly. So the landscape is much bigger, and that's where it's exciting. The challenge, as you describe it, so how I started working with a lot of people in the corporate sectors who were like that, is because I was doing some burnout coaching, and they're all burning out basically. And that's when I started to get really curious around, because I was doing a lot of bringing change, helping set up for change and saving change basically. And so I was working with them on their burnout, but also on bringing change in organizations. But it had me really look at what does it really take. And so it is possible, but the piece that is the challenge is that we're not trained for that. We're trained to be good soldiers. Not to be able to bring shifts and changes. And even if we are in the innovation department, there's this whole dynamic that goes on. How much change can we bring? How much innovation can we bring? And so one piece on that is that we need our leaders. If we really want to be bringing a shift at a different level, we need to look at that within piece. And I know that was one of the big parts of why we're here in this conversation, so we can talk some more about that. And there's the piece that you're also speaking about, which is you've got your organization, which is basically managing the existing. And how do you create environments so that also people who are trying to bring innovation and maybe even paradigm shift at a different level can also thrive. And so one of the things I've been working on also is looking at how we create these kind of bubbles. And the example you were giving around organizations being kind of buying in that innovation. And what's interesting, and I was talking to a client recently, and it happens every time. It's like the product is bought, but then a lot of the people either they are not valued and then they leave, or they're kind of sacked, let's be honest, or they are told that they have to submit to all the processes of the organization who's just bought them. But that breaks the whole ecosystem, the whole culture, the way of thinking of organizations who actually, and that's what had them be able to innovate to create that product. So there's a whole piece there around these bubbles of culture that you have to be much more aware of. And as we go through, you're going to have to be even more conscious of that, because you need some people who are your lifeline, who will be basically creating your future. Because that's what we have to be able to do in a much more agile way. I'll just add one thing on that, because I've been doing a lot on that, and I'm seeing it also in spin-offs. Sorry, I'm seeing it. So organizations, another thing they're doing, especially to build what I call the new, is that they're doing spin-offs. So you'll have one large organization, and then they'll create a smaller organization, which is meant to be creating some of the products for the new. But I'm having them experience the same thing, which is they keep getting leaders sent from the kind of the main organization with a different cultural mindset, which is actually stopping that spin-off from being able to be agile and entrepreneurial to the extent that they can, and they should be. And so it's actually blocking their progress. So I think this whole culture, etc., is actually quite essential piece to look at.
I've just asked Kerry if she would like to ask her question live, because she's got a good question while we're on that. And because I don't want to move away from the corporate to going to within, because that really is the nugget, is the within bit. But the title of this webinar, I created the title From Command to Courage, and it was really a play on. I'm just going to ask Kerry just to come in and to come and ask a question, but it was really on a play on your term from a good soldier to a brave builder. But let's just see if Kerry can ask her question of you, and let's have a quick discussion around that. Thanks.
Hi, Kerry.
Good morning. Actually,
Morning.
good morning from the United States. And as you can see, I'm one of those weird carriers. I'm a male.
Yeah, I see that. My apologies.
No problem. The question that I had though was, how does a leader of a enterprise in a corporate form upsell or upmanage to their board to be able to get the sufficient support to create and sustain a purpose-driven business?
Thank you for that question, Kerry. I think there's multiple ways, but maybe I can suggest a couple that help on that. Is ultimately one of the core conversations is value, and it's the value that we create. So I'll just use a very practical example. After I did my career change, I did a career change into HR, but I had a job that was created for me because I went to see the head of HR, and I managed to convince him to create a job for me to do what I wanted, that was aligned to my purpose. And from there, any other job was created for me so I could keep doing ultimately what I wanted. And what I learned from that, and to be honest, I thought I was just a bit good at basically influencing and selling stuff. But then I saw that I managed to support my clients to do that themselves. And where that's relevant to your question is that part of the art is to be very good at articulating value and articulating the value that you're bringing to the organization. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's where you have to be really savvy. One of the challenges that we have is that in a way, in the system shift, or between, in a way, performance to purpose, I guess, we are a bit sitting in the middle of two value systems. And so part of the art is looking at where do we meet in terms of what we value, and what it is I'm trying to do, where does it actually add value to you and ultimately to that board. And in the past, it may have been more difficult. What I see is right now, there's some amazing opportunities to be had because things are so messy and things are so chaotic. And so it's actually inviting different levels of conversations that we might have not been able to have before, because the usual and standard value right now may not actually get us through. And so then this is why there's this opening about having a different level of conversation around possible different value adds. So that's one piece. Another piece, and actually I was working with someone last week who was doing that, and this week was like, oh my God, it worked, is you can do that based on a stealth. And what I mean by that is there's two aspects to that. Either work on something yourself a bit kind of in your spare time. So, often I may have done a project and I was just working on it until I could get it to a point where I could showcase something. Because also sometimes it's like when people listen to you speak, they can't really see what it is that you're talking about. And especially if you're trying to do something different, what they do is they project a whole load of stuff around what they think you're saying, as opposed to what you're actually saying. So sometimes creating something, even if it's rapid prototyping, and then showcasing it, and then bringing it at the right time when potentially they need it, has you also be able to break through. The other piece is having people see that what you're trying to do ultimately helps them get out of a problem that they have, and also to have them see that maybe it's their idea. Because there's a whole bit also around sort of slipping it in when somebody's saying, oh, I don't know how to do this. And it's like, oh, you could just do this. Or, or there's maybe, have you tried about thinking about this way or something, and planting the seeds for them to go, oh, you're right, maybe I should do this. And it's probably the thing you wanted them to do in the first place. And you're like, yes, why don't you do this? That's a great idea. So it's also a sort of much more stealth way of being able to plant seeds. And sometimes you have to wait in order to see them flourish. So I hope, Kerry, that answers some things or gives you some ideas and thoughts on that.
Fantastic question, because for a lot of executives, the board is almost a stumbling block because the board is still past old generation. Yes, they do bring wisdom, but where, as you say, where we are now, we've got these 100-foot waves at us when we're sitting in the corporate, in the corporate space, in the executive space. And, the boards don't always see that. And perhaps they haven't got the wisdom from that. So thank you, Kerry. That's a very, very important question, is how do you upsell to perhaps older thinkers that are, your trusted advisors or your leaders, but perhaps don't have that frame of reference.
And if I can add something to that, because, and it was a bit of it was a piece that I saw kind of in the last year. There's also something very interesting happening in terms of boards, is that we're going to be at a generational shift around boards in the sense of what I kind of say, because I'm 52, so I'm Gen X. And I'm like, oh, wow, we're up, because it felt like it was always, we were at a certain level, and then there was this other generation that had a lot of the power above us.
Now it's you.
And then suddenly it was like, oh my God, actually, that's us now. And so one of the pieces here, which I think is really interesting, I think there's an amazing opportunity to be able to shift the dynamics of boards through this generational shift to Gen X. But in that, there's quite a lot of navigating, I think, that we have to do, because we don't want Gen X to just be copying what's always been done. So there's a whole question around how do you start showing up differently as that, what I call brave builder of the new, as opposed to good soldier of the status quo. So how are you going to do that? And really taking their place. And I would really love to support Gen X to say, look, here you can really change some of the architecture at the top to be able to create different structures, because the generations behind, there's a lot of them that have a much stronger change maker mindset, I would say, but they're getting blocked literally by the architecture of the organization. So if we can open the way for them, it's like we'll get this kind of wave coming through that can really, I think, change things.
And I also think when you're talking about at the board level, maybe just an example, you're saying use self examples. I had the fortune of having a quick conversation yesterday with the CEO of the largest professional organization of professionals, largest in the world. And he was saying to me that I said, we've got this arrangement. Let's promote. Let's do something together. We've got to get the message out there. You've got such a huge body that you need to influence with this new thinking. And he said to me, he just can't think right now. There is just so much coming at him. And there's this whole geopolitical fray that we're in. And as a CEO, and you are essentially responsible for the influence that you have over all of these professionals across the world.
Yes.
That's a huge responsibility. And as you said, it's starting to land on, hey, it's us, the Gen Xers, and we got to step up to this plate. So we actually have to think about, as you say, re-architecting the very organizations that we were raised in. And I want to just talk a little bit more about your, good soldier to a brave builder, because I think that's what that CEO is now having to come to grips with, and having that almost some habits around creating a little bit of own space to come up with those answers that you can communicate to the boards and to others. But if you can just tell me a little bit more about that, the good soldier to the brave builder.
So I'll tell you about that in just 1 minute. I want to address head on what you just said, because to me they're slightly separate pieces. And I think that what you're describing right now is where a lot of leaders are, and so I just want to also name something around that, which I think will help leaders. And at the moment, as you say, there's so much going on, and it's coming from so many different directions, and also it's so extreme. In terms of disrupting what our brain thinks is normal, that it's like we're under constant attack. And what our system is doing is it's actually going into its automatic survival mechanism of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And why that's relevant is I'm seeing a lot of leaders right now react from that place. And that's a problem, because it's not, when we're in that state, for a start, there's a whole parts of our brains that we can't access, including the relational aspect. So if you're making decisions as a leader for what you want to do for your professional body, which is made of people, and the part of your brain that is focused on literally the relational aspect of people can't operate, then you're not going to make the right decisions. I've been watching, for example, my first career, as I said, was as a lawyer. So I've been watching, for example, some of big law navigating the current environment, and I can see they're just doing fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They're not. And what we have to do is we have to get ourselves out of that. We have to get ourselves centered as a leader and being able to be responsive to what is in front of us and to create what we want to create from whatever is going on. That's actually the art that we have to master as leaders. So I just wanted to name that because
before you move from that, so as you say, that is the art we have to master. Now, talking about masters, a lot of leaders are driven by different masters. So we see in the political space now lots of information coming out around who are their masters. Is it the citizenry that they are representing, or is it the people that paid for them to be in the positions that they're in, to be able to get the citizens to vote for them? And the same is true in I find in a corporate world. Is to move up through the echelons, your master has had to be the system, the process. If you have been in an innovative organization, your master has been, you have to be innovative. But if you're in an organization that's a large, kind of manufacturing organization, your master has been that. So when you have these now 100-foot waves in front of you, what I'm hearing you say is that you need to be your own master now, and not forget that, but certainly act, and we always hear it about directors, act in the best interest of the organization, right? But we really do have to think about the collective organization now. That's what I'm hearing you say. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. It's a different level of, so we are our own masters, but we also have to have mastery over ourselves.
That's it, mastery.
In terms of, and in some ways, as I said, I've taught leadership development for many years, and there's always been that difference between manager and leader. And part of the leadership has always been digging deeper in terms of who are you, what are your values, what do you stand for, and so of course they'll still be managing some of what's in existence, but we're going to have to integrate much more a dance between those two aspects, because as you were saying, it's not just the systems, it's also those value systems that maybe we even took for granted that are being attacked.
We didn't even recognize.
Exactly. It was like so normal. And suddenly, as leaders, we have to navigate that. And we have to make decisions as to where we're going to come from inside of that. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it's important. And maybe if I can share now about the good soldier, brave builder, maybe
Yes.
that would be a good time to come into that. So one of the pieces that I've been looking at for a few years now, and in a way it's simple in the concept, but it's also actually a very challenging concept in lots of ways. And in what it's about, it's how most of us have been brought up in the existing system. And for the most part, to be able to, and especially I've worked a lot with high potentials, high achievers. And if you're in that category, then you'll be very good at sustaining, maintaining, and let's be honest, winning at the existing system and what I call the status quo. So that's our training. Our training is to navigate this system really well and ultimately to get to the top of the tree. You know, when I've been coaching leaders, it's like, hey, what's my next promotion? What's my next kind of piece? Because we're climbing that ladder, we're ticking the boxes of what we think success is. And so, and that's fine. You know, that's the paradigm I was brought up in. And, you know, I ended up in big law. I'm very good at it, you know. So the issue that we have is that that means we were taught to sustain it, but not to fundamentally evolve it or to create beyond it. And so if now that system is showing us its limits and, you know, some pretty serious limits and is needing a systems upgrade, then the problem that we have is we actually have the wrong reflexes and the wrong set of tools, because we have it's like we have the software in our own brain, which is made to keep it as it is. And so if we have to do a systems upgrade, we need to give ourselves a software update that goes with that to be able to start to contribute at a different level. And that's the shift from good soldier of what I call the old status quo or the existing status quo, and brave builder of the new future that I would add we actually want to see next.
It sounds to me like our performance management systems have to change. We have to reward differently to cater for behavior, perhaps a behavior dimension coming into, you know, abiding by your code of conduct and, you know, complying with your code of ethics, you know, it's one thing. But in fact, you know, and we've always done these Myers-Briggs and psychometric testing as whether you're a good fit. And I've never really known whether that's actually really worked. But perhaps it's in that space that we need to start just getting a bit more mature in and opening up the performance management system that deals with just a little bit more than your performance and delivery. So we always spoke about, you know, we have to move in our performance management systems from inputs to outcomes. Now we need to reward the net result of something. But perhaps it's not just the net result of the activity and the company's benefits. It's the net result of you in the organization, as a person in the organization, as participating, moving into this, you know, command to courage, being courageous, and rewarding that a little bit more. I wonder if people have got questions on that, but if you could make a comment, Louise.
Yes, I can actually, because as part of my career, there was a whole period where I was focusing on performance management and improving that in terms of what was going on between managers and their employees and their team members. And it was interesting because when I first came and started looking at it, it was very that kind of top down of doing performance management. And it was like, hey, let me tell you basically everything you've done wrong, or maybe a few things you've done right, and, you know, hope for the best kind of thing. And we shifted it to a very different dynamic. And this was already, before I was looking at this, because for me, it was always about how do you get the human to bring themselves in a different way at work. And to contribute at a different level, so that it's not about just being controlled, but really it's about them really bringing real contribution to the organization, which I think whatever's happening, we would actually want. And so we shifted the dynamic around how they prepared for actually the process, especially, for example, the meeting part, and how.
What did you shift? Sorry, what did you shift?
So we were shifting. So, they would be the bit where they would kind of review in terms of mutual forms and things like that. And then they would have a meeting. And so for example, I created a whole pack for people to just have questions to reflect much more deeply around what had been happening this year. What were they actually really wanting to create? Because, for example, what we know is if we really want to create sustained change, you have to have the desires of the individual be aligned to ultimately what the organization or the environment is trying to achieve. But often people they're so busy, they're not even really thinking about that so much. And so what we did was have them really reframe what performance management was. It was a conversation about mutual needs, and from there creating mutual value. And how were they going to show up for that? How was their manager going to be able to support them in showing up in the right way? And one thing that was really interesting is before we started, there was a 17% satisfaction rate in the performance management and how it was led. When we finished, it was 70%.
Wow.
But I'll always remember that because I was leading these workshops with employees to say, right, you're going to have to step up in also how you show up at these meetings to have a different level of conversation. And you could see how people were shifting and they were going to be braver. So that's why the command to courage.
And there has to also be a psychological safety in that.
Exactly. And that's why we were training both the managers and we were training the employees. So it was like, this is what we're doing right now. We're not going to send you off to literally just be kind of eaten alive or whatever it was at that time.
Career limiting moves.
Exactly. But it was interesting. And this may sound random, but I'll explain why it's not random. I remember one lady who'd worked for the organization for 40 years. And when she left, she said, what I really got from your session is I'm going to go traveling. And I've never left the country, like in my life. And but I think this is what I'm, but now after this hour and a half, you know what? I'm going to be brave and I'm going to go and do that. But what was interesting is you might think, well, what the hell's that got to do with, your performance at work? But in that moment, it meant that this was someone who'd be really stuck in her comfort zone, who was going to go beyond it. And it happened that she said, I'm also going to have this conversation I've been meaning to have with my boss for maybe like 2 years, and I haven't, about how I want to contribute at a different level. And so it's kind of activating the human at a different way, at a different level.
And maybe there's lots of, I see corporate, financial, and economic opportunities here. The one is we are moving into fourth industrial revolution, where AI technology is taking a lot of people's jobs. But do we really want people to have those menial jobs anymore? Don't we want them to show up as people? And let's just get the machines to do the repetitive, no brain, no thinking kind of work, and actually get people to show up, where people can provide inputs and insights that, well, certainly today, the machines can't provide to us as a corporate. So it's almost like there's a corporate opportunity, financial, economic opportunity here as well. If we allow people to unfoil or unveil their purpose and aligning that purpose with the purpose of the organization, we almost have stronger people advocating for the organization far more than the followers of the leaders. But my worry, and I'm going to go back to this, my worry is that, do we have this organization full of cats that, you spend your whole life herding? And you spoke about a bubble. You create a bubble of innovation. But if we're starting to empower people, which obviously means that we are trusting and we're empowered ourselves as individual leaders, if we're starting to empower people, aren't we creating a bit of an anarchy for ourselves?
I love this question. So I've trained people in organizations, as I said, for 25 years. And what was interesting, and this is where it's relevant, is that even before I was looking specifically at the good soldier to brave builder, I was always about activating people at a different level and actually also teaching them to self-coach themselves. And I've done that in every level of the organization. And what I find is, I think there's this whole concept of bringing your authentic self to work, but there's this misunderstanding of what that actually means, I think. And the piece here is there's a way of bringing yourself to work, also understanding that you're in an infrastructure where you are serving the needs of a business because you're choosing to be there. That's the contract that you're in. But it's also about people understanding how they really function as a human. And I think part of the challenge that we have is we even educate people professionally, but we don't ever really educate them as how they function as a human. And so I've worked with real high achievers, and this comes back to the good soldier and brave builder, in the sense that when you're the good soldier, you're taught to suppress a lot of who you truly are. And if you're a very good soldier, exactly. If you're a very good soldier, you're told to be perfect. So you're not going to even experience emotions, right? Because that's messy, for example. So that's be perfect. Then you're going to be pleasing, and especially the level above you. And then I found it was really interesting because I was working with leaders who there was a whole part of their career where pleasing actually got them to where they needed to be. And then there's a switch at a career moment where you actually have to stand out to be able to get to that level of leadership. And it was a really hard transition for people. So there's that piece.
I didn't know how to stand out now.
Exactly. And then the last piece is appeasing. So we're appeasing kind of anything that's going on around us. And then there's polarizations that people do around that. But so the piece there is that we've subdued that. And yes, so if suddenly you start to bring that out, people can, and you don't do that in the right way, people almost polarize. And it's like they're just going to start rebelling. They start opposing and attacking everything or criticizing. But that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're developing a different level of self-leadership. And to being able to connect who you are beyond those patterns of behavior that you've developed, and bringing that in a way that is meaningful, that is adding value. For me, the conversation of the future is what has value. And when you talk about AI, is what does have value? What is the value of a human being? And how do we partner to create value? And which bit is AI going to add value for? And which bit is the human going to be adding?
And that value has to be linked to the purpose, tightly linked to purpose.
Exactly.
Otherwise, what is value? Because it's no longer financial value.
Exactly. And also I think there's a definition of purpose that I maybe also have around individual purpose that maybe is also a bit different. In that, if you think about how purpose has evolved, for a long time, it was, I have a job and I pay the bills, right? Like literally I get my money. That's purpose, right? But because that's, there's a piece where you have to be able to survive. Then, and this is where the bulk of corporate is I'm going to build a career. And that piece is all around ultimately getting more status, getting more power, because as you climb the ladder, the hierarchy, you get more power to be able to decide what it is that you're wanting to do. And so we're getting more, we want to get more money. And if you think about it, that's a lot of where our system is at, but it's a form of purpose. Then you've got the whole kind of positive impact, what I call kind of more calling part of purpose, which is that would have been the humanitarian organization, the NGO sector, which is we're going to have a positive impact no matter what, and we're going to focus on that. And that often has been what purpose has been defined as, really, you know, in terms of a positive purpose. But what I'm saying to people is we have to go beyond that, actually, because in a way, we want to make money. We want to be able to be empowered in the systems that we're in and influence. And we also want to be having a positive impact. But that's not going to be enough. What we also want to do is we want to bring ultimately a different level of authentic creative self-expression into the workplace. And that's going to be essential in terms of actually securing ourselves around AI. But it means that we can harness a different level of creation ability in organizations at this time. Which we will need. If you think, you know, if you really buy into, and I know we weren't sure about that, the system shift, it means that that system's not built. It's like we're building the plane as we fly it, which means we need a different level to develop a different level of creative ability or creation ability. This is not about art or
okay,
people.
Okay,
yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I've interrupted you now.
That's
So that is okay, a different creative ability or creation ability. You've made a distinction between that. Just what is the difference between creative and creation?
So I would say for me, creative, if you look at it, because I was talking.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, it's fine.
If anyone wants to continue, please interrupt me on the chat.
That's fine. I was leading a group coaching actually yesterday, and we had that conversation because somebody, very much good performer, was saying, I know I need to do more creative things, but the problem is my brain keeps thinking that's painting. And I'm like, yeah, it's not. So what we're doing is we're getting back to the root of creativity, which is our unique self-expression. Because what I say to people is your true value lives in the place that you are unique. There will never, ever in the history of humanity be anyone like you again in the kind of complete sort of mixture that you've become, right? And so that is actually how precious you are, but it's that uniqueness that is the value. So for me, creativity is that authentic self-expression, and I can talk a little bit more about what I mean about authentic if you want in a minute. But it's like, how do I bring that authentic self-expression into the world? And it can be, in a way, I'm doing that right now because a lot of the things that I'm sharing are concepts that I have been developing from my creative ability based on my unique makeup. But it can take lots of different forms. So that for me is the creative expression, which is essential. And then there's creation. And so one of the conversations that I have a lot with the people that I work with is how often as good soldiers, we're taught that in order to create something or build something, you set your objectives. And then from your rational mind, your intellect, you'll create kind of the steps there. So that's one part of creation. But how do you do that when you don't know where you're headed because it's not been built yet? And so that's where creation comes in the sense that we now have to create beyond beyond our existing systems, because again, we're seeing that they're being disrupted. And creation is really quite different. And in a way, it is much more like artistry. If you think like an artist, suddenly they'll wake up one morning and they'll go, oh, I think I want to speak about that, or I want to speak about that, I want to speak about that. And then over time, suddenly something emerges that you couldn't have imagined before. So there's a whole different way of creating and creation that we need to also master, which is much more what I call emergent.
I just see Peter's put his hand up. I'm just asking Peter if you would like to. Just let me know in the chat if you'd like to ask a question live to Louise. But okay, I understand now. So creation is far more, there is an unknown, and
Yes.
you are working within the unknown, and you're orchestrating within this unknown. It seems to me, and we've got 6 minutes left, to be continued.
That's fine.
Definitely, this conversation can't end. But Peter says no. Sorry, unintentional hand. But it seems to me that what we're talking about is, and it goes back to where we started, is that, you know, you and I being in our 50s, we actually having to stand up now and be counted. You know, it's no longer working within the system. We are now the leaders of the system, and the next generations that are coming up are far more in tune to what we are hearing, but certainly change, innovation, new world order, new way of doing things, and it's not just, you know, the youth of today. Actually, there's a whole system generational change, and what you're talking about is the ability for us as the older leaders to recognize and to help us recognize how we have to lead differently in this new system that's emerging. And no one's ever led something like this before. This is the first generation to have to lead like this in this where we are now. So I think, you know, all of the lessons that you've been pointing out about understanding you and who you are, and creation and creativity and purpose-led, and, you know, really allowing creativity and innovation within your space around you, creating psychologically secure spaces. Now you must button if I've forgotten something, but this is what the new leadership needs to look like. And it takes, if you're in an executive role, it takes you explaining this to the board by doing this, by behaving this way, and perhaps being explicit about it to the board, perhaps an older generation, to say, this is the problem that we're facing, and this is what I'm doing to address and to get opportunities from that problem, rather than just risk mitigate. I always go back to, you know, okay, I'm aging myself now. So I'm on the other side of the 50s from you. But when internet and Facebook and even games, computer games started coming out, and I was a chief information officer, I was in the IT space. And the first thing that I looked at my CIOs around me, they did was they shut it down. No internet, because it will impact productivity. No playing computer games. And so as I was going, well, the opportunity is, if you see somebody that's playing a computer game, you need to understand why. Is it because they don't have enough to do? Do they need some space? Do they understand why? Because there's opportunity there. You know, why are people going to the internet? Well, because they can't get the information in the organization. They have to go outside. So instead of just shutting things down, we can use this opportunity. So it sounds to me like you're saying that, Louise, is that there is an opportunity now for the leaders that have been really instilled in the old system way of thinking, first of all, to recognize that there is an old system. And although we think it's normal and that's how people should be, it's not normal anymore. They both have to run in parallel. But is there anything you'd like to, and I know we've got 2 minutes, anything you'd like to add to that in terms of takeaways for people on the webinar today?
I think to just echo what you've just said, it's interesting because for the older generations, we think either we don't want to make the choice, or we think that the piece here is that we have a choice to make. And in some ways, the older generations, we've been lucky because it was a choice. Whereas what I say is the younger generations, they don't have a choice. Because the system will have broken down in terms of, for example, the sustainability and the ecosystem. You know, why I got into the sustainability piece, it was in 2008, I went to a workshop and they showed me the images of the future if we carried on the way that we were. And those images were meant to be the things that were meant to happen at the end of this century. So around 2100, whatever. And those images are happening now, which means it's accelerated. So at the end of the workshop, they said, when the children ask you what you did when the planet was dying, what will you say? And, whether it's the planet or humanity, I mean, it's a bigger piece, but it was, and at that point, that was my decision moment where I knew it was a choice. I could keep going like I'd always had, or I could decide to choose a different path. And I wanted to make sure that I could look into the eyes of those children and said, I have done everything that I can. But I was doing it not thinking I would experience what I was seeing. What's interesting is it's accelerated so much that I am experiencing it. And I've had some personal experiences where I understand that all of this is personal, where I was put in life-threatening situations because of it. And, I had to find solutions. So the reason I'm saying this and quite adamantly is one of my joys is that I teach at the University of Geneva. And those children, when I make the decisions, are now the students. And I can look at them in the eye and say, this is what I've done to open the road for you. And I am committed to keep opening that road for you. And what I think in terms of those generations is they do not have a choice. They are going to inherit a world where they're going to have to be in between system, trying to create those new things. So the earlier that we empower them, I think the better. And I think that's actually what true governance is about.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. ... to be continued. Thank you everyone for joining us online. It's been a fantastic conversation and we will certainly continue this conversation. Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.